Bai Macfarlane. Bai, so nice to meet you. I'm so glad
Yeah.
to meet you. Tell me, you work with Mary's Advocates. Tell me about the organization, what it does.
Well, Mary's Advocates, two-pronged. It's trying to reduce unilateral no-fault divorce,
Okay.
but it's also supporting those who are unjustly abandoned.
Okay.
So, doing both.
Okay, when you talk about unilateral no-fault divorce, explain a little bit more what that is.
In the old days, they used to have a ground for divorce, like someone did something at fault, justifying separation, like adultery. And now with no fault, the courts have power, supposedly, to force a divorce on a family when one party just wants it. So unilateral is one party wants a divorce, then the court supposedly has power to take over the family.
Okay, but you use the word forced. Is unilateral divorce considered forced divorce in your mind?
Well, I think it's forced on the children and the spouse who doesn't want it. That's why the other prong of Mary's Advocates is supporting those who are unjustly abandoned.
Okay.
You know, if I was an adulterer or an abuser, okay, my husband would have a legitimate reason to be separated according to our understanding of marriage.
Okay.
That's
Now-
not no fault.
Okay, gotcha. Now, your understanding is all based on the Catholic faith. Is that correct?
Probably. I think a lot of it's natural law too, so I would
Okay.
say it's bigger than Catholics. I would say most people would think, yeah, that makes sense. But
Yeah.
Mary's Advocate definitely comes at it from a perspective publicizing the long-standing church teaching on separation and divorce from a Catholic perspective. But
Okay.
a lot of stuff we publicize also is just constitutional principles that
Right.
can relate to anyone.
Okay, so you mentioned that you are helping people that are victims of unjust divorce,
Right.
unilateral divorce. Can you tell me a little bit about maybe one or two people that have contacted you, people that have been unjustly divorced? Is it mostly men? Is it mostly women? Combination?
It's kind of both. One guy, his wife wants to separate, wants a divorce, but he wants to keep the family together. So he's a husband that's trying to keep his family together. He doesn't want to come across as hostile and argumentative. So what he as a husband does is he's letting the wife get away with all sorts of things in the court system, but he doesn't want to fight because he doesn't want to fight with his wife.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is that, you know, she ends up getting the kids when maybe she had a serious mental problem and he didn't. I mean, in this case, the woman is schizophrenic, authentically schizophrenic, and
Yeah.
the husband came to know that as the time went on.
Yeah, that's so
But
hard.
he didn't want to fight because it's his wife. He wants to keep the family together.
Yeah,
Or women who really have no recourse whatsoever. If you're a woman who's not a primary breadwinner, and then the husband is the one who makes all the money, and then he's the one that wants the divorce, well, some people think, oh, you know, the divorce will help you, but really, the divorce courts don't care about both parties' obligation to maintain a marital home. So a woman might get, oh, you know, you're getting some spousal support, but the spousal support is still, whatever, 20% of what the dad used to contribute to the marital home.
Right.
So the kids lose the home, the wives have to figure out how to pull things together. It's kind of a joke.
yeah. So a lot of people look at divorce as being an issue between two adults. It affects much more than that, though, doesn't it?
Well, it definitely affects children because
Right.
children don't want their parents to be separated, and it also affects the culture at large because who has to pick up the pieces?
Right.
And then you've got these issues of the kids that grew up in divorced homes, and how do they view trust? How do they view their role in the world? How do they view sexuality? How do they view all sorts of things? Because from a natural law perspective and a Catholic perspective, marriage is the institution which is the way children are designed to be raised. You have some security, you have the male, you have the female, you have to learn how to get along with your siblings, you don't always get what you want if you're in a half-normal family. All of these kinds of things get all ruined. So then these kids are just left trying to figure it out.
Right.
And it's wrong.
And when you have a person who files for divorce, who gets divorced without cause, they're teaching the child the opposite of those values at the same time. It's not just that they don't know the values, but they're actually learning that maybe the best thing to do is to quit.
Well, it's schizophrenic.
Well, many things.
I don't mean that in a mental,
No, I know.
mental illness problem, but you know, here we are we trying to teach our children character?
Right.
Okay, well, what does that look like? You know, you do what you say you're going to do, you keep your promises, you know, you follow through, you're dependable, but then at the same time, as an abandoning parent, I break my marriage promise. It's about selfishness, it's about getting what I want. I don't really care, or how it affects my children doesn't matter because I need to have my happiness.
Right. So basically, a person can get divorced because he or she is unhappy right now.
Or worse, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So do the courts ever side with the abandoned spouse?
Do the courts ever side with the abandoned spouse?
Do the courts
I
ever?
don't even think they're allowed to. because the abandoned spouse is the defendant who doesn't want the divorce, but the statutes say if the plaintiff comes forward and alleges whatever verbiage that particular law has, then the courts feel like they have to issue a divorce.
But now in Ohio, it's a little bit different because you actually have abandonment.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't find that out. I'm from Ohio, and I was a
Right.
divorce defendant, and my first lawyer had me sign papers asking for a separation. We hadn't been, it eventually got turned into a divorce just because we had lived out of state for a time. So
Okay.
he probably would have had me sign papers asking for a divorce. He said I had to file in the civil form for divorce or separation in order to get any financial support from my husband, because my husband had left, and they do the thing with the draining the bank accounts and all, and I
Right.
was a stay-at-home mom at that time. But he didn't tell me two things, but one of them is abandonment in Ohio is a first-degree misdemeanor. And the other thing in Ohio that he didn't tell me, that we have a law about having a spouse has to provide for necessaries of the family. So as an abandoned spouse in Ohio, I could have just borrowed money from a third party, like a family member, and then gone to the common police court, forgetting about domestic relations court, and just say, hey, here's the check stubs that show the family member was paying my mortgage and paying my phone bills and buying me gasoline so that I could buy my kids, travel around and get groceries or whatever. And then my husband could have been court ordered to reimburse that party for necessaries. But the divorce lawyer didn't tell me any of that. He had me sign papers. He also had me sign papers saying that the grounds for no-fault divorce existed in our circumstance, but he didn't tell me that's what it meant. So to this day, was he being ignorant because the only kind of divorces he ever saw where both parties say they want a divorce, he's never heard of someone saying they don't want divorce, or did he know exactly what he was doing?
Right.
We'll never know.
So you don't have a lot of trust necessarily in the legal system.
Ha ha ha.
Not in the least.
Well, they have their own agenda. Like, they all work together. They're in the same judge. Like Cleveland, whatever. We have 5. It's pretty big. They maybe have five divorce judges and then all these magistrates. So it's all the same building. They're all working together, and their goal is to facilitate smooth divorces because
Versus trying to.
we as a I think they all have their own agenda, and it's one of two things. It's either to coerce both parties to agree to have a divorce. So you're getting them to sign the paperwork where both mommy and daddy agree they want the divorce and they want to split everything up. Or they're trying to coerce the defendant to do that because the plaintiff is already willing to do that. Or if there's a lot of assets in the family, they want to have lots of motions and counter motions and actions and counteractions going back and forth.
To drain the accounts.
Because they can get lots and lots of money.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And do the judges help to facilitate that, in your opinion?
I don't know if the judges could do anything to stop it, even if they wanted to, actually. Because the judges don't want to do judging. I mean, in any job, you want to be efficient and all, and so they make it look nice, so it's actually them being efficient, and they're helping the parties settle out of court, and that's a good thing. But really, it's just coercion of splitting families up.
So when you come down, like when you're talking about judges and exercising judicial judgment, one of the things that I think we so often lack in the whole divorce process is the idea of due process and equal protection under the law. So you have something that the judge is supposed to be making sure the defendant is guaranteed and granted, and yet in the name of efficiency, because sometimes making sure that the defendant has due process and equal protection can make the courts a little bit inefficient. They can increase the backlog that the judge has. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, even talking about due process, there's 2 people I know right now, 2 defendants, one in Pennsylvania and one in Nebraska, and they're challenging unilateral no-fault divorce. And one of the strategies they're using is that there's a problem with separation of powers because a judicial court is supposed to be making a judgment based on facts and law.
Right.
But if a defendant loses every single time, and if the legislators wrote a law that says every plaintiff who says we have an irretrievable breakdown shall get a divorce, then we've just changed the whole process into something that's not a judicial process.
Right. It now becomes an administrative or ministerial function.
And that's not what courts are supposed to be about, and then that starts automatically violating lots of rights of a defendant.
Yeah. And that's very interesting because I was talking with somebody yesterday and I said, why don't we just get administrative people? Why don't we get people just with a stamp that says, okay, come on through, we're just going to stamp things. We don't have to listen to any arguments because the decision is already granted. It's a de facto decision against the defendant. The divorce will be granted. As you mentioned, in every single instance, there is no defense. So if you, and my argument down in Texas, for example, about the unilateral no-fault divorce, it's guaranteed there, even though the state code or the Texas Family Code says the judge may.
They don't do.
What's that? Yeah,
They say they may deny the divorce. It's in their option to deny divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they never do it. So therefore, you would think if they may, they also may not. In the last 5 years, I've just said, can you give me 3 cases in which the judge has denied the divorce? 0,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
So what your point is that this is a big issue with separation of powers because the judge is no longer acting in a judicial manner.
Well, the thing that kicks in here too, what we're talking about now is a little bit of legalese, and
Right.
I'm somewhat proficient talking about it.
But that's
But
not
when you're the defendant,
Yes.
you're going in, you are emotionally attacked. People lose weight. People have breakdowns. People start sobbing at their pace of employment. They can't concentrate. They have blackouts. I mean, it's really, really a vile attack against your being when your children are going to be taken, your property is going to be taken, the person who promised to be good to you in good times and bad has betraying you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, you know, and you could lose your home, you could be bankrupt. It's really, really bad.
Yeah.
And then during that time, you're totally ignorant about these legal concepts. I was totally ignorant
Right.
about the legal concepts. You end up signing things they tell you to sign because you don't know what to do.
Because your attorney probably is telling you to do this. It's in your best interest.
My attorney did. And
Yeah.
then the other thing I was getting at is, you think, it's a judicial process because you're in the court building, there's the lawyers, there's the magistrates. This is a judicial process, this is due process just because it's in a court building.
Right.
But it's not.
Right.
It's a mess. It's such a mess.